Hello and welcome to a new episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. I'm Raham Morsi and today we have a number of different segments. First, we start with politics, then a closer look at the world of business and finance, and sometimes we have stories about the interesting world of technology and the arts. Our final segment of the show is a closer look at the sports world, so stay tuned after the break. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived in the United Arab Emirates on Monday. During the visit, the president met with UAE's President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Presidential spokesman Ahmed Fahmy said that the two leaders probed means of boosting bilateral ties and held consultations over regional and international issues of common concern. The story.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met Monday in Abu Dhabi with His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, President of the United Arab Emirates. The two presidents expressed their pride in the close fraternal relations between the nations, reflected in the close coordination between the two countries, with the aim of supporting the stability of the Arab region, especially at this stage in which the challenges are increasing internationally as well as regionally. The meeting also discussed ways to strengthen bilateral relations at various levels, especially with regard to revitalizing economic cooperation, joint investments and trade exchange, in addition to enhancing cooperation in many development fields to achieve the interests of the two brotherly peoples. President Sisi also congratulated the United Arab Emirates for its space achievement by undertaking the longest space mission for an Arab astronaut, wishing the United Arab Emirates and its people further progress and prosperity. The two leaders also discussed the latest developments in regional arena as well as other issues of mutual concern, and the two leaders agreed to continue their joint efforts to push towards resolving existing regional crises, taking into account the Arab interests, enhancing Arab solidarity and achieving stability and prosperity of the region. The meeting also tackled the discussions of the COP28, which Dubai will host by the end of the year 2023, building on what was achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh COP27, and with the aim of giving impetus to joint climate action at the international level in a way to preserve environmental resources and serve the interests of humanity at large.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi returned back home from a visit to the UAE. His discussions with the President of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, focused on means of boosting ties between the two sides and the latest developments in the Middle East region. Both sides reportedly agreed to continue with efforts to settle the region's crises. On his social media account, UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed said he was glad to hold the meeting with President al-Sisi. He said ties between the two sides are strong and marked by a long history of understanding, harmony and closeness. He said the UAE is always keen to coordinate with brotherly countries for the interests of the Arab world and its people, and for the stability and the development of the region as a whole. And joining us over the phone to tell us more about the significance of this visit is Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Good evening to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good evening, madam.
Thank you for joining us.
Sir, my pleasure, madam.
Can you tell us about the significance of having this visit during this time? The President held several activities despite the fact that it was a short visit to the UAE.
Well, I personally believe that the talks between President al-Sisi and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan centered on the following. The first is, of course, the COP28 that will be hosted by the United Arab Emirates next December, and coordination between the present chairman of COP27, which is Egypt,
Yes.
with the host country, the next host country of the COP28. Climate change has become really a very pressing problem for the world. The second question, I guess, relates to the latest developments in Sudan.
Yes.
The news coming from Khartoum are very concerning, are very worrying, and really, so I think, I tend to believe that the situation in Sudan was one of the main topics discussed between the two heads of state. Thirdly, the question of in Libya, particularly the elections, general elections and presidential elections, because there is an international consensus that the way out for Libya, out of the present crisis, is to hold these elections as quickly as possible, so that the Libyan people will choose its representatives, and on the other hand, will choose its president, next president. And the fourth item on the agenda of the summit was bilateral relations between the two countries.
Yes.
And the way they could cooperate in advancing and in increasing the investments by Emirati businesses in the Egyptian economy. So I think these are the four most important questions that were discussed in the summit yesterday between President Sisi and Sheikh Mohammed bin Nahyan.
Okay, Ambassador Hussein Hariri, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you so much for joining us over the phone. And moving on, the UN General Assembly kicked off the 78th session in New York on Tuesday, where world leaders discuss how to confront global polycrisis and find strategies to accelerate action on a 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Addressing the inaugural session, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for developed countries to shoulder responsibility towards climate change issues. Guterres also called for providing developing countries with sufficient funds to confront climate change repercussions. He also called for respecting human rights charters, in addition to empowering women and ceasing all kinds of violence against them. In his speech to the meeting, U.S. President Joe Biden said Washington bolsters efforts aimed at expanding the UN, as well as reform efforts. He further said the U.S. supports the constitutional system and democracy. Biden asserted that developing nations should be given more voice and representation at international institutions. The U.S. leader reiterated that the U.S. seeks a responsible administration for competitiveness with China. He asserted that the U.S. would confront any trials aimed at hindering the international navigation. On climate change, the U.S. president said that the U.S. works on reducing emissions with 30% this decade. He stressed that more efforts should be exerted to achieve sustainable development and progress. Biden charged that Russia hinders to eliminate weapons of mass destruction. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky took center stage at the UN as Biden warned the world of consequences if it tries to appease what he termed as Russia's aggression. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry is representing Egypt in the high-level segment of the UNGA meetings and will deliver Egypt's speech on the 23rd of September, participate in the Sustainable Development Goals Summit and the Climate Ambition Summit. The top diplomat will further chair the ministerial meetings on losses and damages, as well as a global forum on combating terrorism. Shoukry will speak before the Business Council of International Understanding and American Council of Foreign Relations, as well as meeting with the officials of the World Economic Forum. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry participated on Monday in the UN Summit for Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, in New York, which is held on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meetings. In his speech before the SDG, Shoukry stressed Egypt's support for the international efforts to revive the Middle East peace process in light of the Arab Peace Initiative. The Foreign Ministry said that the top diplomat will also deliver Egypt's speech before the UNGA on September 23rd. Also on Monday, the Foreign Minister presided over an Arab ministerial meeting which was held on the sidelines of the UNGA meeting. The meeting tackled means of coordinating efforts aimed at supporting Arab issues in the UN, especially the Palestinian cause. Still on the ministerial meeting, the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry presided over the ministerial meeting on behalf of Morocco's Foreign Minister, whose country is chair of the current round of the Arab Ministerial Council. The meeting is held on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. During the Arab Ministerial meeting, Shoukry presented a review of the outcome of the meeting that was called by the EU, the Arab League and Saudi Arabia with the participation of Egypt and Jordan. The meeting was held to discuss efforts to revive the Middle East peace process within the framework of Arab Peace Initiative and European views extended over the issue. The Palestinian Foreign Minister had presented during that meeting a review of the latest developments with regards to the Palestinian issue to the UN General Assembly. Still on the sidelines of the UNGA, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry met Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister Michael Martin, who is also Ireland's Foreign and Defence Minister. The meeting discussed bilateral ties and regional and international developments. Both sides stressed the importance of boosting bilateral ties in various fields and expanding economic cooperation. During the meeting, Shoukry said it is important to reform the mechanisms of international financing bodies to make it more capable to address the needs of developing nations and the current global challenges. Also on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting, the Foreign Minister Shoukry held talks with Albania's Foreign Minister. The talks discussed boosting bilateral ties in various domains, especially the economic and trade fields. They also exchanged points of view over a number of international issues of mutual concern in light of Albania's membership in the Security Council. Developments in the Middle East, especially Libya, Syria, Sudan, and the Middle East peace process topped the agenda of the talks. The latest developments in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, climate change, and illegal immigration also were part of the agenda of the talks. The government in eastern Libya said the Prime Minister, Osama Hamad, dismissed the members of Derna's Municipal Council and referred them to investigation over the deaths of thousands during floods spurred by the storm Daniel. Hundreds of people have protested in Derna, venting anger against authorities and demanding accountability after floods killed thousands of its residents and destroyed entire neighborhoods. Protesters took aim at officials, including the head of the eastern-based Libyan parliament, Aguila Saleh, during the demonstration outside the Sahaba Mosque. Monday's protest marks the first large demonstration since the flood which swept through Derna when two dams in the hills outside the city failed during a powerful storm, unleashing a devastating torrent. Israeli settlers stormed into Al-Aqsa Mosque on Tuesday under heavy police security from the Maghariba Gate. The settlers conducted provocative tours in the Holy Mosque premises. Palestinian security forces said the occupation forces also arrested 4 Palestinians, including a child, from the Arub camp north of Jericho in the south of the West Bank after breaking into their homes. Another young person was arrested from Jerusalem's Old City. In another incident, the Palestinian Ministry of Education said scores of students suffered from suffocation when occupation troops broke into the town of Anata in Jerusalem and deployed in the school areas, firing tear gas bombs. A plane carrying 5 Americans freed by Iran was on its way to the United States on Tuesday, a day after they swapped for 5 Iranians detained in the U.S. and unfreezed $6 billion of Iranian funds in a rare deal between the arch foes. It followed a carefully choreographed exchange agreed after months of Qatar-mediated talks that was triggered on Monday when the funds that had been blocked in South Korea were wired via Switzerland banks in Doha. After the transfer was confirmed, the 5 U.S. prisoners plus 2 relatives took off on a Qatari plane from Tehran at the same time as the 2 Iranian detainees landed in Doha on their way home. 3 Iranians chose not to go to Iran. In the world of business and finance, the IMF will grant Morocco a $1.3 billion loan on Tuesday. Earlier, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank decided to hold their annual meetings in Morocco in October, despite a recent earthquake that killed more than 2,900 people. A source familiar with the decision said. The decision made on Monday by senior IMF and World Bank officials came at the request of Moroccan authorities, who had pressed the global institutions to proceed with the October 9th to 15th gathering in Marrakesh, just 45 miles from the site of a 6.8 magnitude quake on September 8th. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said on Friday that a decision would be made Monday after a thorough review of the country's ability to host the meetings. Georgieva added that Morocco's Prime Minister told her it would be quite devastating for Morocco's hospitality sector if the meetings were moved to a different location. It was not immediately clear if the meetings would be scaled back in some way. The International Monetary Fund plans to tell China to boost weak domestic consumption, address its troubled real estate sector, and rein in local government debt problems that are dragging down both Chinese and global growth. Here's a story.
IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said in an exclusive interview the messages will be delivered to the Chinese authorities in a forthcoming IMF Article 5 review of China's economic policies. The fund will strongly urge Beijing to lift its growth model away from debt-fueled infrastructure investment and real estate. China's aging population and falling productivity were playing a suppressing role in its growth rate, along with companies in the United States and Europe shifting supply chains away from China. China's problems in the real estate sector have also caused consumers to rein in spending. The IMF in July forecast China's 2023 growth rate at 5.2% and 4.5% in 2024, but warned it could be lower given the contraction in real estate. Georgieva also said it was important for China to address consumer confidence in its real estate sector by financing the completion of apartments that buyers have already paid for rather than bailing out troubled developers. The IMF is preparing to issue a new set of global growth forecasts ahead of IMF and World Bank annual meetings on the 9th to 15th of October. The new forecasts are expected to reflect concerns about anemic GDP growth around the world, as most large economies are still lagging pre-pandemic growth rates. With China generating about a third of global growth this year, its growth rate matters to Asia and it matters to the rest of the world. She added that there were some areas, including digital economy and green technologies, that remained attractive for investors. She cautioned it was important to ensure China's push on electric vehicles was not done using subsidies in a way that created unfair competition.
Joining us over the phone to tell us more about this is Dr. Mohammed Rouji, an economic and financial expert. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening to you and our audience.
Sir, why do you think the IMF is telling China to boost economic or domestic consumption and address the real estate sector? Is it possible that a slowdown is coming within China very soon?
Actually, you have to know, the IMF will strongly urge the regime to shift its growth model away from debt to the infrastructure investment and real estate. I believe that China is, they have to actually, they have to use the policy space in a way that helps them to shift the growth model towards more domestic consumption, because the traditional way of infrastructure pumping more money in this kind of environment is not going to be productive. One of the most important points that comes to the top of my mind, which is China aging population and falling productivity, were playing suppressing growth in growth rate along with companies in the United States and Europe, as you know, and our audience, shifting supply chains away from China.
Yes.
Nowadays, China problems in the real estate sector have also caused consumer strain in spending. Actually, project that without structural reforms, medium-term growth, China can fall below, I believe, or as far as I recall, 4%. And nowadays, you can find that the IMF is forecasting, the IMF in July forecasted China 2023 growth rate, as far as I recall, which is 5.2% and 4.5% in 2024. That's worrying.
Yes, but sir, I mean, on the other hand, if you speak to Chinese officials, they will tell you that China is not doing as badly as the IMF would like you to think. They are on the forefront when it comes to electric vehicles. They're the top producer when it comes to electric vehicles. They're on the cusp of becoming the leaders when it comes to AI, for instance. And obviously, factory output is quite high there because they are considered the factory of the world. Especially when it comes to microchips related to phones and so forth. Do you think that there could be some sort of middle ground when it comes to how the Chinese perceive themselves and how the IMF actually perceives them?
I believe that nowadays in our world, the only constant in the life is the change. And nowadays you can see easily the dynamic changes in the market and the economic powers are changing nowadays. As you know, we are going to the digital economy and the green technology that demand attractive for investors nowadays. And China should continue to push on electric vehicles, was not ban subsidies in a way that created unfair competition. And they have to go for a lot of new and sustainable projects that will positively reflect on the economy. And I believe that the points or the Chinese nation or people, they are claiming that they are growing well, but nowadays the IMF is highlighting that they are growing, but they are growing slowly. They can do more. They can grow. They have the room to grow more and more. But actually, they have to change their policy in terms of monetary policy, in terms of consumption policy. A lot of things should be changed. And this, as I told you and our audience, nowadays the only constant in life is the change. We have to change to adapt with the digital era. That we are going to go global.
Yes, but sir, one of the issues that, like you were saying, the IMF addressed was the fact that there has to be some sort of way to weigh in on unfair competition because the Chinese government is subsidizing or helping the industries to grow. But really what the Chinese would probably say is who considers this unfair competition is the developed nations. It doesn't really affect the developing countries, and the fear of unfair competition mainly comes from the US.
Actually, one of the most important points that China, they have to address consumer confidence in its real estate sector by financing competition of apartments that buyers have already paid for rather than building out troubled developers. Also, one of the most important things to focus on to change the GDP structure a little bit and focus on digital products and services more and more to have, which is nowadays all countries going for it. You know, as you know, and our audience, the GDP structure is consisting of the three main parts, which is the industrial part, the agriculture part, and the service part. And the highest added value, which is the service part. They have to focus on, they have to cope with the new trends, which is the sustainable products and services nowadays, which has the highest added value.
Okay, Dr. Mohammed Rushi, an economic and financial expert, thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to take a short break and move on with the rest of the episode. ECB policymaker Francois Villeroy said Tuesday the European Central Bank will maintain its interest rates at 4% for a sufficiently long time in its bid to bring down inflation. The ECB raised its main interest rate earlier this month to a record high 4% and signaled its latest hike was likely to be the last as the Eurozone's economy slows. It had risen alongside Eurozone government bond yields on Monday following hawkish comments from the European Central Bank. Policymakers that further interest rate increases were on the cards. The OECD raised its global economic outlook for 2023 on Tuesday, but cut the growth forecast for next year as interest rate hikes aimed at curbing inflation take their toll. Here's the story.
The OECD raised its global economic outlook for 2023 on Tuesday, but cut the growth forecast for next year as interest rate hikes aimed at curbing inflation take their toll. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said the world economy is now expected to grow 3% this year, but it will slow to 2.7% next year. Meanwhile, Britain remains on course to have the highest inflation of leading rich economies in 2023, according to Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development forecast, which showed the country's inflation problem widening compared with most of its peers. Britain's headline inflation rate was set to average 7.2% over 2023, up from a previous forecast of 6.9% made by the OECD in June. The fresh estimate represented the biggest upward revision for any group of 7 economies apart from Japan in the latest set of projections by the Paris-based think tank published on Tuesday. It was also higher than Germany's expected inflation this year of 6.1% and France's 5.8%, both of which represented cuts from the OECD's June forecasts. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has promised to halve inflation by the end of this year before an expected election in 2024, meaning it would need to fall from about 7% now to around 5% in December compared with the same month last year. The OECD's updated projections, which suggested hitting the target will be a close-run thing, showed British inflation was set to slow to 2.9% in 2024, the same as France and slightly lower than Germany's 3%. Britain's high inflation rate has led the Bank of England to raise borrowing costs 14 times in a row since December 2021. It is expected to increase bank rate again to 5.5% from 5.25% on Thursday, although economists and investors think that could prove to be the last hike of the BOE attempts to smoother inflation risks in an economy that is showing signs of slowing.
Moving to the tech and science world, Alphabet Inc. said on Tuesday that BARD, its generative artificial intelligence, will have the ability to fact-check its answers and analyze users' personal data as the tech giant scrambles to catch up to ChatGPT in popularity. Here's the story.
alphabetics, Google said on Tuesday that Bard, its generative artificial intelligence, will have the ability to fact-check its answers and analyze users' personal Google data as the tech giant scrambles the catch-up to ChatGPT in popularity. The release last year of ChatGPT, a chatbot from Microsoft-backed OpenAI, sparked a race in the tech industry to give consumers access to generative AI technology. At that time, ChatGPT was the fastest growing consumer application ever and is now one of the top 30 websites in the world. Bard has not taken off in the same way. In August, it received 183 million visits, 13% of what ChatGPT received according to the website analytics firm, and as it seeks to gain ground in the fast-moving AI space, Google is rolling out Bard extensions, enabling users to import their data from other Google products. For instance, users could ask Bard to search their files in Google Drive or provide summary of the user's Gmail inbox. For now, Bard users will only be able to pull information in from Google Apps, but Google is working with external companies to connect their applications into Bard in the future.
Two Russian cosmonauts and an American astronaut docked with the International Space Station on Friday after blasting off amid raging tensions between Moscow and Washington over Ukraine. Here's the story.
Roscosmos cosmonauts Oleg Konenko and Nikolai Chubb and NASA astronaut Laura O'Hara lifted off earlier on Friday from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan aboard the Soyuz MS-24 spacecraft. The crew docked at the ISS 3 hours later. The Russian news agency said at the orbiting station the trio will join 3 Russians, 2 Americans, a Japanese astronaut, and a representative of the European Space Agency. The liftoff took place after Russia's first lunar mission in nearly 50 years failed last month. The ISS is a rare venue for cooperation between the United States and Russia. Ties broke down after Moscow unleashed its offensive in Ukraine last year. Konenko alluded to the tensions during a pre-flight press conference on Thursday, saying that unlike on Earth, cosmonauts and astronauts took care of each other in space. O'Hara praised the station's legacy and said it had been bringing the countries together. Konenko and Chubb were scheduled to spend a year on the ISS, while O'Hara was to spend 6 months abroad. It was the first mission to space for both O'Hara and Chubb. The 3 take over from Russian Dmitry Petelin and Sergei Prokopyev, as well as NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, who have spent 1 year aboard the ISS. While that trio was initially supposed to return in March, their mission had to be extended after their vessel, the Soyuz MS-2020, suffered a coolant leak following damage from a suspected tiny meteoroid. Last month, Russia's Luna 25 module crashed on the moon's surface after an incident during pre-landing maneuvers, in a huge embarrassment for Moscow. Moscow last landed a probe on the moon in 1976 before shifting away from the lunar exploration in favor of missions to Venus and building the Mir space station.
Moving to the world of sports, Pep Guardiola said Manchester City have not done anything special by winning just one Champions League as the holders prepare to launch the defence of their crown. City won the top prize in European club football for the first time in June, beating Inter Milan 1-0 in the final in Istanbul to complete a historic treble. Guardiola's men, who have won all 5 of their Premier League matches this season, face former champions Red Star Belgrade at the Etihad on Tuesday. Real Madrid lead the way with 14 Champions League titles, followed by AC Milan on 7. Liverpool and Bayern Munich have 6 each. Newcastle returned to the Champions League for the first time in 20 years as AC Milan on Tuesday, hoping this is just the start of their rise on the European stage. The Magpies have spent more time in the Championship than facing Europe's elite for the past 2 decades, but are aiming to follow in the footsteps of Manchester City when they broke into the Premier League's top 4 in the first full season since the Saudi Public Fund Investment Fund took an 80% stake in the club. The Newcastle project appeared to be ahead of schedule. But the early weeks of the new season have brought a reality check as Eddie Howe's men suffered consecutive defeats to City, Liverpool and Brighton before bouncing back with an unconvincing 1-0 victory over Brentford on Saturday. Real Madrid came from behind to beat Real Sociedad 2-1 as the hosts regained the top spot in La Liga with their 5th consecutive win. Carlo Ancelotti's side made their perfect league run to reach 15 points to clear of second-placed Barcelona, who crushed Betis 5-0 on Saturday. Real Madrid kicks off their Champions League campaign when they host Union Berlin on Wednesday before visiting Atletico Madrid for their league derby. Finally, in the world of tennis, Spanish tennis star Rafael Nadal reiterated that finishing his career in 2024 remains his goal, while admitting he has taken 2 operations to try and heal his hip injury. The 37-year-old announced in May that the hip injury he suffered at the Australian Open in January meant he had to step away from the sport to try and come back stronger. Nadal, a 22-time Grand Slam winner, reiterated on Monday that he would like to play again and be competitive again. Nadal had 2 surgeries on his hip, one of which he announced publicly in June, which was set to take around 5 months to heal. Well, this brings us to the end of the sports segment of this show and the show as a whole. Thank you for watching Nile TV Newsroom Live. I'm Rehan Morsi, and stay tuned for more here.